Hi, I'm Beck and welcome to a video where I talk about authors I gave a second shot. I'm gonna see how I go in this video. I am just recovering from having an upper respiratory infection, so you can probably hear a bit of a huskiness to my voice. I'm gonna see how I go and hopefully I don't have too many coughing fits. But without further ado, the list of authors that I gave a second shot starts with Aidan Thomas, and they wrote Cemetery Boys, but they also wrote The Sunbearer Trials. And as somebody who doesn't really read much young adult, I had a bit of trepidation before going into these, and I thought, oh, I enjoyed Cemetery Boys, but I've unhauled it because I didn't want to hold on to it because it's a trans author who wrote about a trans protagonist, and I thought, well, it's not really benefiting anyone else having it sit on my shelves, so I donated it so someone else can discover it. And then I listened to the audiobook for The Sunbearer Trials, and The Sunbearer Trials is almost like The Hunger Games meets Percy Jackson in a sense, because you've got these characters who are almost demigod-like and they're living in a society with humans alongside them, and they've got to worship the sun god Sol or Sel, and the sun god, they demand a sacrifice every decade, and that sacrifice sustains everybody from being attacked by the evil gods. And so it relies on this trial done by these people that the sun god chooses, and whoever wins the trial is safe, and then whoever loses the trial is the one who goes and gets sacrificed to Sol. So I liked that dynamic, I like that storytelling, and I'm looking forward to the sequel. So I'm really happy that I tried this author after enjoying something they previously published. So that is a win for this list, but there are some on this list that I have tried again and they didn't really succeed. And the second author on this list is Rincha Peko, and I read The Bone Witch. I tried a couple of times to continue the series, but I don't know what it was. After the first book, I just didn't care anymore. I don't know if it was the narrative style, I don't know if it was the characters or the world building, whatever it was, I just couldn't get into it. And then Rincha Peko released another book, and that was Silver Under Nightfall, and that made my best books of 2022 list. So I'm pretty glad that I continued this as well, because if you don't give authors a second shot, I know my reading taste has changed and shifted quite a lot in the last few years, and I thought I might actually benefit from going back and trying new things from authors I thought that I've found only okay. In this case, I think it'll be a new favorite. The next one is an author that I kind of mildly regret trying their new stuff, because I tried Malice by this author, and they are John Gwynne, and I found Malice okay, but nothing to necessarily write home about. It's a story that has a lot of multiple characters in it. It's got all of those classic fantasy tropes that you will love, but the writing style of it I just found very bland to what I was expecting, and I didn't care about any of the characters. It all felt very samey to me, and I'm very drawn to character voice as a selling point for a story. So if your character voices don't immediately jump off the page at me, then I'm not going to stick around and find out the magic and the plot and the world building. It's just not worth it. So I did finish Malice. I gave it 3 stars. There was nothing necessarily wrong with it, but I just didn't like it that much compared to other fantasies that I've loved. And I was like, surely authors over time develop as people and as writers in their craft, and everyone at some point on BookTube was going head over heels for Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, and I was like, it's got like a Viking-esque feel about it. It combines that with old magic and tradition and this awesome world building. There's going to be some amazing battles. I thought I'd love it, and I gave it initially a 4 stars, which is a pretty good rating, but honestly I just think it would be better as a 3.5, because everyone hyped up the ending to me and it kind of landed not poorly but in a so-so way, and I'm not anywhere interested in continuing the series. So at least I tried it. I understand why people are hyped about it, but it's not one that I loved. So I went there, I tried, I left, and I'm not continuing, and it feels nice to know that I don't have a massive overhanging fantasy series on my TBR that I might enjoy. I actually tried it and now I've ruled it out. Then we've got an author that you might not expect, and that is Alice Oseman, and they wrote the Heartstopper graphic novels. They've also written a series of books as well. I guess a series, but they're more like companions. So there's Radio Silence, Loveless, I Was Born for This, and Solitaire, and I've read Solitaire and Radio Silence. I've still got Loveless and I Was Born for This on my TBR cart to read. I have put them on different TBRs during each month this year with an aim to read them, but I'm trying not to force myself to read anything. So if I didn't get to it during that month, I've kind of let it fall by the wayside a little bit, and I'll pick it up again later and see what my interest is like in them. I think my interest is waning a little bit because I respect what Alice Oseman is writing about and the subject matter and the tone of voice, but I think there's been a shift in what I love reading about, and her tone of voice in the books that I enjoy by her are only hitting like 3s, 3.5s, and I think if I'd read them when I was 15 or 16 I would be adoring them and feeling very emotionally impacted, but I'm reading them now and I'm going, these are great, but they're not new favorites. So I hope now that I've got the more recent 2 books that have been published by her, I've got those to read next. So I've kind of started with her old older stuff. So I'm hoping that I end up giving them at least 4 stars each, because I've heard so much praise for Loveless in particular, and I know that it has an ace character in there. So I'm really looking forward to understanding that perspective a little bit more as well. So I'm just looking forward to it, and I'm going in with a positive mindset, and I hope that aligns with a 4-star rating. Now, the last author that I'm going to talk about is R.F. Kuang, and she wrote The Poppy War. She also wrote Babel. People call it Babel, but I listened to the audiobook and it's called The Tower of Babel, so I'm going to say Babel. So I read The Poppy War and I loved the first half, hated the second half, and I gave it 2 stars. I was so upset and angry at it. I can see where Rebecca Kuang jumped from Poppy War into Babel. I think all of the ideas that she wanted to write about in Babel, she couldn't have written back then because she was still kind of finding her feet, but they were much more coalesced and fine-tuned in Babel. And I think because of that development and the different kind of context and story that we were delivered in Babel, I think I could appreciate it more and understand more of the nuances and see where she was going more so than in The Poppy War. The Poppy War felt very much like 2 different books to me that were mushed into one, and for me it didn't gel and I didn't like it. But for Babel, I'm really glad that I went back and tried it. It took me a long time to read because it felt like the pace was a little bit slow, but because I was listening to it on audiobook, I kind of had no choice. I was sitting on a train to work anyway, so I just kind of churned through it as I could. And I think that really benefited the storytelling because you needed time to sit down with it and digest what it was telling you about, because I don't want to talk too much about it because it's very much a slow burn story, but what I can say is that it tackles the discussion of colonialism. It's set in the 1830s or so, and it follows these kids who are taken from their homes. So the main character is taken from his home in Canton when he's about 8 or 9 and saved by this guy who is a professor at Oxford, and the magic system is very kind of peripheral in this story, but it's there as a device to drive your understanding about how colonialism is impacting these characters in a massive way. So they can kind of imbue different silver bars with understandings of language, but you can only do that if you have a fluency in them. And so these kids who are born in their home countries have a fluency in their languages, and then they're brought to Oxford so that the British Empire can start using these silver bars to kind of conquer further and further out across the world. So it's a very detailed and dark and intriguing discussion told through the lens of Robin, who is this kind of like optimistic, don't want to deal with the consequences kind of character. And I like the different nuances and lenses here. So I appreciate what R.F. Kuang did in Babel, whereas I didn't love it as much or even at all in The Poppy War. The Poppy War felt more fantastical and more like it should be a fantasy book, whereas Babel felt like it was very much ingrained in those themes and it was doing them justice. So I'm really happy that I actually continued. I didn't think that I would like Babel, but I've seen everyone hype it up so much, and I've seen people hype it up who didn't necessarily love The Poppy War as well. So I was like, I need to actually try it. Maybe I will like it. And I did give it 4 stars, and I read it in February. So those are all of the authors that I have recognized that I've given a second shot. There might be more, I'm not sure. If you've given an author a second shot and you loved another book by them but you hated something else, let me know, because I'm always interested in finding new books to read. I am now going to go and drink the rest of my kombucha and hope that I don't have another coughing fit. But thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.